Hello, and thanks for joining the session. Today we're going to continue working on our chatbot, and let's kind of go over some of the things that we have left to do. I've taken the big chunk of stuff that was already completed, sort of made it smaller so that we could kind of see more what's going to be missing from here, and then was able to add some new things. So as far as the core services that we're connecting to, for Twitch, we still need to be able to reconnect if we get disconnected. Same thing for Discord. We don't really have a good way to handle that. For the public chat, we've already started working on this. We've added the controller for session chat messages. We're doing session dash. And then we started working on the continuation token. So that's what we worked on the previous session. That's what we'll be working on today as well. And then we also need to add author info, but I believe this is already implemented. We're just not actually showing it anywhere yet, so it's a little bit difficult to see that. As far as new features from what we had on the list originally, we want to add the ability for Astrocasts users to be authors. Right now, we're only getting information from Twitch, Discord, and YouTube, but we want to be able to get that from other people as well. So that's kind of where we're at this point. We also need to work on presence so that we can see who's actively viewing or taking part in a conversation. The current UI that we have, we'll pull that up just so we can take a look. We have designing an API continuation token part 2, so I can see which session is currently on. I can see who the listeners are, but I don't, let's see, I'm going to close the debug window. And I'll also be able to see chat messages as they come through. At least that's the theory. So I'm going to hop into Discord real quick. This up. I'm going to link to the live page so that people in Discord can see this. So let's go here. All right, so I'm going to pass that in, and let's see if the bot picks this up like it's supposed to. And sure enough, it did. So it's not doing anything fancy yet. I can't actually click on the link, but it's getting the information as it's supposed to when posting it online. So far the bot mostly works. I have everything right now behind an API, behind the admin firewall, so nobody else has access to this information. And what we're building now is the public API so that we can get this information from for being able to embed it on specific pages. So let's say I go to astrocast.test. If I go onto the page for this, what I'd like to do is be able to have the chat messages show up alongside, similar to what they do on YouTube or what they do on Twitch. So real time during the session, anyone who lands on this page will be able to see the chat that had happened up to that point. I'd also want to be able to do like a pop-out thing. If we go to Twitch, I think that YouTube does this as well, but I want to be able to have the ability to pop out the chat. So I think it's under here. Yeah, here we go. Pop out. So I want to be able to move the chat to a pop-out window so people can move it off to their side screen so that they could then watch video full screen. After the fact, after sessions are recorded, I'd like to move the chat from up here to down below. So I want the chat to, I think I want to move it down below. I'm not really sure. I haven't gotten to the design part of that yet. And also I'd like to experiment with showing the messages in real time as they pop up. If you're looking at a recording and you and someone types something, let's see, this is about 5 minutes in. I want it to show up at that point in time, just as if this were a live recording. If you skip ahead further into an episode, I want it to actually show the whole chat up into that point. So I think we have all the tools in place to be able to do that. It's just going to be a question of actually implementing it all and designing it. So that's kind of where we're at. What we worked on in the previous session, we did the first bit of testing that we've done in this any of the Astrocast sessions. So let's do bin PHP unit. We did a little bit of work to make sure that we could handle different types of data for our continuation token. And the idea of the continuation token is that it's going to contain enough information to ensure that if you go back to get additional information from, say, if you're polling the chat messages, you'll be able to see just the new messages from the last time you polled. The continuation token won't get lost. If you look at like pagination using like the typical sense, like if you go page-based pagination, let me think where I can see that. I'll just go like Google. Let's do Astrocasts. If we come down to here, if I click to page 2, let's see if it's actually doing. I don't know if they're actually doing it, but the idea is that if we were on, say, page 3, and additional items had been put onto the front of the page, and if I click page 4, there's a good chance I'm either going to get 3 messages I've already seen before, or I'm going to lose 3 messages that I'll never see. So we're trying to do something a little differently to ensure that no matter what we do, we get the same information that we should expect otherwise. Looks like Supernova just joined chat. Thanks for joining. Okay, so let's take a look then at our continuation token. Right now, we have a continuation token that just contains an ID. That's the main thing that we're interested in. We are able to get an ID, which is just getting the ID back. ID can be null, so I think I'm going to want to put some additional functionality in here to determine whether or not the continuation token previously existed. If we get null or whatever, we still want a continuation token, but if the ID is null, we need to be able to handle the case differently. When we decode input, currently we can accept null, we can accept an empty string, we can accept something that looks numeric, and then we can do something with the encoded string. So in this case, we are base 64 decoding the input and then getting the pieces. And if the first piece that is underscore separated is a 1, then we know that it is a V1 instance. So we're also, looks like we had a function here that we can get rid of. So the idea, the other part of this is if we look at how we encode it, we're encoding V1, so 1 is indicating V1. If for some reason we decide we want to have a different structure for continuation tokens, we'd be able to support those by adding like encode V2, and we would just have a different way to handle it. As long as we're base 64 encoding them and following the structure being 2 underscore, we should be able to get this just fine. Right now, we don't have to worry about that, but this does sort of set us up in a position that we can potentially do this in the future if we need to. All right, so the testing, so we can take a look what that looked like to review that. We had a couple of cases here, just making sure that it gives us the right information. The things that we are doing here for asserting that the continuation token's ID is 5, we aren't doing that for the empty values. So let's do that right now. Assert null. So in this case, we want to assume the continuation token's ID is null. So let's run our test to see if that's still true. Oh, ooh. So this is good. So we're actually getting an error here. The getID method must be of type integer, and we're returning null. So I think that we actually want to fix that here and give getID the ability to pass back an integer or null. All right, cool. So that actually saved us from a little bit of a problem. It decodes null. We're going to want to have this same functionality here as well. And it decodes an invalid string. So if we get something that doesn't make any sense at all to us, then we should still have null for an ID. We have a number as an int. So over here we're passing in 5 as an integer. And this one we're passing in 5 as a string. In both cases, those came back successful. It's able to decode input. So this input had a ID of 523. That's what's actually encoded in here. And we are able to get that back. And then on the encoding side, we can see that the ID was 523 with a timestamp of this gives us this string value, which is what we have up here. So there is other information that is encoded inside the continuation token that we aren't actually accounting for. So this timestamp isn't something we can do anything with. Not sure we want to actually do anything with it right now. So we're just going to leave that like it is. But this more or less fully tests our little continuation token. So we can go ahead then and go back to how we're using it. If we go to our session chat messages controller, we get the next page token, and right now we're saying the default is null. And we're just going straight to the repository, and we're using this next page token and passing into find by session. If we look at what we're doing for next page token now, we see if it's there, then we want to make sure that the ID is greater than the page token. So this is how we ensure that we get the right value. Now, I had originally said we might want to do something with a, what was it, chat, message continuation manager. I'm not sure we actually need this. So I thought maybe we could do it just without having to worry about the repository. So let's implement it here first, and then we can see if it makes sense for it to be on the repository instead. So because what we're actually doing here, if we go back to our repository, this is essentially the next ID. We'll rename it to that. All right, so now this makes find by session a little more robust. And then we can do limit equals 20. Let's double check what we wanted for that first. So message, so original, to start out with, we're going to do message limit equals 2 or 5. So let's change that to 5. And then let's see here. If limit query limit no offsets. Wonder if it has to be on the query itself. So I don't think this is actually the query. This is the query builder. There we go. So let's do query equals get query. There we go. And then we ask for query get result. All right, now let's see if we have limit, offset, no. Oh, now we need to work with query. Set max results, there we go. And we'll do that to limit. I don't exactly understand why Doctrine has this distinction, which things belong in the query builder versus the query itself. But that is something that is kind of odd, I guess. At least that's odd for me. All right, so this should work as it did before, except now it should be limiting to 0. So let's go back to our session here. Let's do chat messages, except we want to do API. And let's do session 78. Which session are we on now? I guess it doesn't matter. Let's do 79 and see if that's today's chat so far. Nope. It's awesome to see stuff almost instantly in the chat. I think that might have been yesterday's. Let's look at 80. So 80 doesn't exist. 81 does. Okay, so this is today's. So that means 81 was yesterday's, which had a fair amount of chat. So this was where we started. Here we can see that next page token is set to 231. And that is because the last message in the set here was 231. So I think that should be good to go. So, and we're limited to 5, which makes sense. So we're going to go in here and see what else we can do. So find by session. Let's go back to our session continuation manager. I'm going to set this to null. Let's see what happens there. Okay, yeah. Now we're getting all of the chat messages. So we're gonna let the find by sessions method behave a little differently than it had before. So given a continuation token, we should be able to this. Let's do session chat messages, session chat message repository, find by session. Let's do session that was passed in, continuation token, get ID, and let's do 5 plus 1. It'll hopefully make sense in a little bit why we did that. We're essentially looking for whether or not there is an additional message or not. So if we only get 5 values, then we know it doesn't have a next value just yet. Okay, and then return messages. Next page token. And here's where we'd have to do something. So next page continuation token. So we actually need to create that. And then has next. All right, so we have a little bit of work to do here, and I think this might actually want to be an object instead of returning an array, but just to start with, I think this will be fine. All right, so let's right away throw this into a collection. So we'll do collection, or collect. So this might end up being a class variable rather than something local. But for now, we'll just do it like this. So has next size count is greater than limit. So if we have, if we've asked for 5 and we actually get 6, which is what could possibly happen if we do limit plus 1, then that means we have a next page. So if has next session chat messages, and I want to pop, I believe. So I want that last message off because we don't actually want it. We don't actually want to send back 6 messages if there are 6. We still only want to send back the same number. So this ensures that we will have 5 messages always, 5 or less messages always, rather. This also is an indicator to the API that will be so that the consumer can know whether or not they should request the next page right away or if they should wait and start polling. So it has next, so that's good. Next page, continuation token. So this should be continuation. Next page, continuation token. We're going to encode v1. And we're going to do session chat messages first. And then we want to get ID. And then send, let's see, can we send in null or do we have to actually pass it? Timestamp. Let's do equals null. There we go. Well, let's double check our test to make sure we didn't break anything by making this assumption here. All right, so session chat message get ID. We're not going to pass in the second value. So we're always going to have this, except in the case unless this is null. Which could potentially happen. If we don't have any session chat messages, if it's an empty session, that could be bad. Let's see how that works later. Right now, I know that if I go to a session that doesn't exist, say session 82, session 83, I get a 404. So what I'm going to do is update the code to use this new service. And if I do use that service, I'm hoping that I should actually get a next page continuation token that contains null for the first value. All right, let's go look and see what happens now. So let's go to our controller. Next page token. Now we're actually getting it from the last. We need the last value. So this, we need to build messages. So let's copy this code. And we're actually going to be able to do something more interesting here. Since session chat messages is already, a collection, we can do map like this. Message. And then just copy this bit. All right, so this is the data. Data is going to come from our service instead. We no longer need this value. Instead, we need our message continuation manager. And the data is going to come from that. Find messages, session, and the previous continuation token. So we need continuation decode from the value we get here. And we can get rid of this call. Next page token. Now let's see what happens. So let's go to this function first. Oh, undefined variable messages. All right, so I take that back. Let's just call this message. Okay, so this gave us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Awesome, and it says has next true. So it looks like this is working, at least for this one. Let's see what happens on a session that doesn't exist. Oh, so it actually is, yeah, okay, so it doesn't actually have a session 83. So I need to go to a session that exists but doesn't have any chat. Okay, here we go. Whoops. Find messages. So on cannot call to member function get ID on null. All right, so I was afraid of that here. That's what this is doing because last doesn't exist. So let's do last message. There we go. All right, so what we can see here is that every time I reload this, it says has next as false. It's giving me 0 messages, and each time it's still generating a new page, next page token. What I'd like to do is, just for fun, I'd like to have this output show me the value that's actually encoded. So let's do next page token decoded. Let's see here. What does it have me? This doesn't give a value, return value. So let's do token. Okay, cool. So the only thing I have that I can do right now is get ID. Let's do that. Oh, it's been an instance string returned. Oh. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. This is gonna work. Oh, yeah, okay. There we go. Must be of type integer or null string given. So I do give it a string. I should be able to decode that because it is a string. Continuation token. All right. Unless this is one of those weird cases that that value actually looks like. Let's see here. Let's look at our test. string given. Huh. So line 41. Wait, no, it needs to be in here. Huh. Adam just joined. So the problem that I'm having is that the encoded value isn't being decoded correctly. Okay, so I think the ID is actually empty. So this is, I'm generating an ID at this point that apparently is null or something. Something that I can't get the ID of. So I'm printing the parts. This assumes that if it's 1, then part 1 is going to have something valid in it, and it currently does not. Yeah, so, and I'm pretty sure that's what's going on here. I'm also using microtime, which I hadn't been using before, so I'm not sure if that's mucking anything up. But I don't think it is. So I should double check what the output of microtime is. Returns a mixed float instead of a string. Maybe I'll do that. Microtime true. And then let's remove the debugging code for a minute. It's not going to make a difference here because I think I see what's going on now. But at least we should be able to see the value again. All right, so this value is what's being passed in. It's being decoded incorrectly because parts 1 is empty or something. Var dump. So it's a string. Yeah, it's an empty string. So I think the right way to handle this is to make sure that I don't pass in null here. I think 0 might be appropriate because we're never going to have message ID 0. And this will ensure this should ensure that we get at least an integer or numberish looking thing. So let's double check our test. Is it here that we fixed it? Yeah. All right, so it gets a string 0, which is good. Failed asserting that 0 matches the expected 523. All right, so let's back this off to what we had originally. Get our test working again. Cool. Get back to here. We should be able to do this now. And if we go back to continuation token, we can get rid of this var dump. Okay, so when we don't get any values, we create a next page token with an ID of 0, which makes sense. But every time we reload this, we're still going to get 0, but we are going to get a new next page token every time because we're including microtime in there. Let's double check here, make sure this works right. All right, so next page token, again, it's changing every time I reload, but what it's encoding inside there is ID 231. So I think I can do, let's see here, check the controller, next page token. And then we'll use this value. Oh. Underscores. Let's say it gave me back the same information. That's not right. There we go. So now the first one was 231 was the top number here. So 227, 228, 229, 230, 231. So the next page token should show me from 231 on. So here we see 232, 233, 34, 35, 36. The encoded ID is 236 and has next true. So we should be able to drop in here. And we see next page token is 241. So we got 237, 238, 239, 240, 241. Not sure how many of these we're going to go through. I think there was a considerable amount of chat, so let's see. Let's go more quickly. It's really small, okay. So then we keep having has next. Thanks all, so this was actually my sign off. It does say we have next, so I'm expecting one more at least. And yes, so we had at least one more. So first we had my thanks all from Twitch, and then we had a thanks all from YouTube, and now we see has next equals false. So the idea here being that starting off from just going directly to the root URL for this session, you would be able to consume all of the chat messages in order based on whatever the paginated length is here. As long as you keep seeing has next equals true, you can reliably go get the next page right away. Otherwise, you can start polling. And either way, you're going to specify the next page token that will get you there. So going through them all, I don't think I can actually go through them all again. Oh, here we go. So I think this was the first one. So the JavaScript API that we're going to have to build that consumes this, it's going to look similar to what we had before, but a little different, just because of the way we want it to work. We can consume these, keep consuming, keep consuming, keep consuming, keep consuming, until we get to this one, I believe was it. So we would consume the next message, and then we would know that, hey, you know what? Let's wait 20 seconds before we go again, because there isn't currently any more messages for us to consume. 20 seconds later, then we can finally use the next page token, and it's going to be empty. It's also going to say has next is false, which means we shouldn't try again right away. We should wait for our polling frequency to try again. So we would continue to do this until a new message shows up. Oh, that was interesting though. Oh, this is good. Debugging is good. So what happens here is that next somewhere along the way, we this message here, where it says has next equals false, the next page token contains 267, which is great. The problem is now that since there are no messages, the logic has decided that the next page token's ID should be 0 again. So we need to handle that case. So let's go back to Continuation Manager. What we have here is, if there is a last message, we should use the last message ID. Otherwise, let's use the continuation token get ID. I think that's what we're looking for. So if we look at this message, so it's going to generate a new next page token. If I visit this, now it's going to say 267. So that is actually correct, because it should be the last ID or whatever ID was passed the first time. So if I go reload, jump into this message, the messages are empty. It's still 267 until such time as another message pops up. So this actually works. So let's go back now to make sure that this worked. All right, so that still works. So if we don't pass anything in at all, it defaults to, it effectively acts as 0. So we will use the, let's see here. Yeah, if the continuation manager, if we look at find by sessions, if the next ID is 0, it's not going to do any sort of lookup at all. It's only going to, or it's not going to do any sort of limiting. It's only going to pay attention to it. It's only going to pay attention to it if this value is set. So I think this fixes that, and I really wish I could or should write a test for that particular case. So I'm going to remove this extra output, because nobody really needs to know that. Let's walk back through it again, just to make sure that it looks like we get everything. Next page token. And we can also make sure that we could do a larger number of messages per payload. We don't have to stick with 5 just because, but 5 was convenient to be able to make sure that we're actually getting pagination happening. There we go. So has next is false. I'm going to poll 20 seconds later. Has next is false, no messages. I'm going to poll 20 seconds later, and there's still no messages. So, okay, cool. So I think that works, which is good. I think that also means we can probably try this on our admin view as well, because it's essentially doing the same thing. Let me double check. So let's go to the controller. And this will actually show the paging information come in. So let's copy this to live controller, chat messages. So the difference is that the session comes in via the URL for the public API. For the admin API, we're detecting it based on the stream manager to see what the guest session is. Otherwise, the rest of this is the same. Oh, I'm going to copy this, paste it. We need to bring in our continuation ID token class, and let's add this as a controller service argument. It also means we can get rid of this controller service argument, I think. But we will have to bring it in. All right. So the only weird thing here Let me undo this real quick. So what happens if session is empty? I don't think I was handling that case. So I'm not going to worry about it. Nope. So this is actually bad. And yeah, I'm not going to do anything about it though. So let's go and see what happens if I reload this page. Actually, first I'm going to change the limit to 3. Reload, so we get the first 3, and then 20 seconds later, we should get the next 3, and 20 seconds later, we should get the next 3, which I think will just be 1 or 2. I could probably speed up the polling on this. There we go. Cool. So let's do 2. And let's go to live and lower the polling interval to, say, 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, we should see some more information pop up. All right, so let's add some additional chat. Let's see. I guess I don't have my Restream client up and running, but this should allow us to see an offset where it's not an even number. Oh, Joe says he's still here. Supernova, rather. Cool. So this is actually going to be a case where visually we see that Joe's message popped in real time while we were still pulling in information from via the API. We didn't show the message again because we're keeping track of the messages that we've shown. Let me pull up the code to show that, because we have the seen messages map. So really, we did actually pull that information from Joe later, but we didn't show it again because we didn't, because we'd already seen that message come through. So that's why it didn't show up. But if we reload, everything should show up in the correct order. Why would you not show the entire history instead of a few at a time? So how do I describe this? I would show the whole history, but I'm trying to account for massive amounts of history. So if there were, say, 600 chat messages, I might not necessarily want to create a single payload for 600 chat messages, or 300, or however many it was I said. By doing it this way, it allows you to do pagination, but also polling later to continue getting additional information. The other bit here, this has next value, is used to determine whether or not you should just go get the next page right away because we know there's more chat messages, or to wait and start polling. So if we look at, well, then wouldn't you load the newest first? Well, that's why the next page token keeps track. Yeah, you could load it either way. So Supernova's asking, why wouldn't you load the newest first? You could do it either way. This particular way only makes sense because this is naturally how it's going to fill out. Like if people were actually typing this real time. So I wanted to account for that case first. The sort of the future thing where I want to replay the chat messages later, that might mean that we'll have to have a different message or a different way of querying the messages to get them back in the reverse order. The other thing is that currently this code assumes that the messages coming in order are time specific. That's not always going to be the case. So this code is going to have to be more robust. The public code that lives on the session sites or the session pages. For my live chat interface, it doesn't matter because I'm not going back in time. But for like this particular session, if someone wants to go back and they tune in right at this point, they should be able to put a message online right there to also chat right around this bit of time. And when the information is displayed later, it should be inserted under this message from Adam and before this message from me based on the timestamps. So that's going to be a little more complicated. And for at least for right now, the fact that it comes in visually in this order is just sort of a side effect of just doing this simple version for my actual workspace. So the other thing now is that we know that this works. It seems to work, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to go back to the continuation manager. I'm going to set this limit to 50. And so then if we reload, it's going to load everything all at once. Unfortunately, it still shows the, it's still doing this weird thing with, it doesn't seem to be doing, yeah, it's not doing it in Safari. So the idea here is that I have this iPad actually sitting below my main monitor. So I want to be able to see who's chatting. I want to be able to see all of the stats and see the chat as it comes in. So that can sit there, so I don't always have to look to my right. So that's what I'm doing right now, which is annoying. So this is just going to sit there. It's going to have all of the chat information so I can keep up to date with everyone, which is awesome. I can also see when the stream dies, hopefully, and then when everyone leaves. I don't know why, everyone's gone, not watching anymore. Sometimes that means the stream actually stopped. So it is nice to have that as a backup. So I think this is probably going to be the end of this particular session. We've done everything that I had hoped to do with this continuation token stuff. It works more or less like I was expecting it to, which is awesome. And that means that next week we can try to start working on consuming this API in a little smarter way on the actual session pages, so that this little chatbot is something that more people can interact with. And then once we get that up and running, I think I'll be pretty happy. So thank you all for joining. Hope you have a good week, and I'll see you next week.